Hello, and thanks for joining us for the Farming Today podcast. I'm Kaz Graham, and in this edition, the Minister for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs in Northern Ireland updates us on progress in the Sustainable Agriculture Programme and reducing pollution in Lough Neagh. And the public spending watchdog says the way England's environmental regulators work is in need of major reform.
There's overlapping areas of responsibility between different regulators, outdated IT systems. The regulators themselves have struggled with recruiting and retaining key skills and expertise that they need.
And we'll have more on that a little later in the programme. First, though, it's reckoned there are more than 700 named British cheeses. What a joyful thought to start the day. This week, we're looking into how those cheeses are made, where they're sold, and what the current challenges are for cheese producers. Today, we're off to a cheesemaker that's a familiar name on the shelves of some UK supermarkets to see how they're faring in the current climate and how the supply chain works when it's on a large scale. Fiona Clampin has been to Wyke Farms in Somerset. She met Managing Director Richard Clothier at the milk reception area, which sees around 1 million litres arrive every day in peak season.
Most of our milk comes from within 30 miles of the dairy here. You'll see the tankers coming in and out. It's a real hive of activity here today because we're not normally this busy this time of the year. Normally spring is our busiest time of year, but the farmers are producing loads of milk. We'd normally be doing 5 days a week at the moment, but we're actually still doing 7 days a week. So the farm milk is up massively on last year, and we're processing milk as fast as we can, making as much cheese as we can to get through the milk.
And you say 7 days a week, is that 24/7?
Yes, it's 24/7, including washing and cleaning. So we clean once in every 24-hour cycle before we start making cheese again. But we have our own unique starter bacteria here to develop the cheese and the flavours that are unique to us. Those starter development is going on all the time.
And does quality control happen here as well?
Quality control is something that happens throughout the whole process, but yeah, we do test all the milk on arrival from the farms, test all the tankers, check all the temperatures and that sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, my grandfather used to say you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, and it takes 10 litres of milk to make a kilo of cheese. So it has to be the local quality milk is absolutely paramount for making prize-winning cheddar, as it says above the door there.
I do like your sign there. Award-winning cheddar starts here.
Yes. Well, it actually starts on the farm, but
right.
Yeah.
I mean, you're a producer on a large scale of cheddar and other cheeses. I can't quite comprehend how the local farms can produce that amount of milk.
In global terms, we're a very small cheesemaker, but yeah, in the southwest, we're a large cheddar maker, but this is one of the most dense milk regions in the whole of Europe.
So where are we going to go to next?
Well, I think we should go down to the cheese store and try some cheese. So we've seen the start of the process, and then we'll go to the end.
So we're in a kind of warehouse type thing, and it's just piled high with wooden boxes of cheese. How many boxes would you say there are in here?
Well, there's about 2,000 tonnes of cheese in here, in this store here. Once the cheese is made, it goes into these stores. We're just below room temperature in here, and the cheese is aging away in the wooden boxes. And Graham and myself will go through, and our graders will go through and try the cheese as it's aging, and then when it's suitable for each individual market, then it's released for packing and sale.
Well, let's taste some, shall we?
Yes, let's try. We're going to open the boxes up. So this cheese is a little bit of a hybrid. We say it's the best things out of a double Gloucester and a red Leicester and a cheddar, all brought together in one really interesting flavour. So this is doing really well in some of the export markets. Just got it listed in a major retailer in the US. This has been locked away for over a year, this core of cheese. So you sniff it and it's releasing all of those interesting aromas.
Oh, yeah.
And so I push the cheese off the core off the iron a little bit, and we'll break a piece off. Would you like to try a piece?
Yep.
So I'm picking up some savouriness, some sweet notes, loads of creaminess, and some nuttiness as well. So there's a little bit of sweetness on the end, but that's what I call a really nice well-rounded Somerset red, and that's exactly how people are looking for it in those markets. So bursting with creaminess, with all those lovely things happening behind it.
That's Richard Clothier, now MBE for Services to Sustainable Agriculture and Food Production. And he'll be travelling to Windsor Castle to pick up his award next month. Congratulations from us as well, Richard. Now, the way that farmers are paid public money for environmental work has been changing since Brexit. Ministers from all the UK nations were at the Oxford Farming Conference talking about the future for their agri-environment schemes. Northern Irish farmers have described being left in limbo last autumn as they waited for the full introduction of the Farming with Nature payment. But Northern Ireland's Minister of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, Andrew Muir, told Charlotte Smith that progress is being made in rolling out the whole Sustainable Agriculture programme.
So this is a journey. It's not without its complications and resource implications. We're on the rollout of that. Significant milestone was the 1st of January of this year, where we had the farm sustainability payment coming in place later on this year. So legislation is now in place, and also new farm sustainability standards, which actually started the 1st of January. There's more to come, especially in relation to agri-environment, and it's important we get that support out in the ground.
It has been relatively slow, particularly in comparison, obviously, with what's happening in England. Are you concerned about that or happy with that progress?
I am. I think there's lessons to be learned from England. Setting up new schemes, particularly agri-environment schemes, is complicated. So it's important we get a balance right.
I just want to talk briefly about Lough Neagh. 40% of Northern Ireland's drinking water comes from it, but there's still massive problems with pollution there.
This is a critical issue for the people of Northern Ireland and also me. It's an ecological and biodiversity crisis. In relation to pollution, I have got a paper that's going to go to my executive colleagues in the next number of weeks in terms of strengthening regulation and enforcement around sewage pollution. It's critical that we do that. In terms of agricultural pollution, we have a challenge there. We consulted on the Nutrients Action Programme last year. We set up a task and finish group with an external facilitator. That's going to report back to me very soon. We're going to do a further and final consultation, and we're going to continue that road in terms of addressing that issue. Critical to that is a just transition in agriculture. I need capital support for the farming community to support them in that journey. And also processors have to step up and help us with that, and they are. And I think there's a good collaboration occurring around that.
You call it a crisis, and yet we're still talking.
Yeah, we are, because this was as a result of decades of neglect. There is a high build-up of pollution within the lough, and there's no quick fixes available, but we need to grasp those difficult decisions. Climate action is critical in terms of dealing with that issue. It also proves a challenge in terms of resilience of agriculture, but also we need to have stronger environmental governance. Northern Ireland is an outlier in the rest of the UK and Ireland that we do not have an independent environmental protection agency. I commissioned an expert panel to look at this. They came back and recommended that, and I'll continue to engage with the executive to get that established.
But surely there is an argument that those places that are near that lough need to change, and fast.
Change is required, and that's why I'm engaging with the Irish Government in terms of support under Shared Island, in terms of a catchment-based approach, in terms of that on-farm advice. That's absolutely critical. That's been proven to be very successful. The Irish Government, from the top, in terms of the Taoiseach, is supportive of this. So we're working very closely on that, because we want to work with people on the ground to turn this around. I hear a very clear aspiration for change within the agriculture community. We need to support that with regards to funding. We also need to deal with the other causes of pollution as well.
Andrew Muir, Minister of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs in Northern Ireland, talking to Charlotte at the Oxford Farming Conference. Now, outdated IT systems, staff shortages and a government department not doing enough to support a joined-up approach. That is the Public Spending Watchdog's assessment of England's environmental regulation. The National Audit Office, the NAO, has published a report looking at how DEFRA, the Environment Agency and Natural England operate to enforce more than 3,000 pieces of legislation. The NAO report is one of a series of reviews into the bodies, and it says that whilst they've made a good start, the scale of change required is substantial. As you might have heard on the programme earlier this week, the Office for Environmental Protection warned that the government is unlikely to meet legally binding targets by 2030 unless it acts now. Rich Sullivan-Jones is the NAA report's director, and I asked him how big a job reform is going to be.
Potentially a very large job. There have been big reviews in the past year covering this area, particularly Dan Correy's review of DEFRA's regulatory landscape, which had suggested that environmental regulation really needs to do a better job both at protecting nature and, while doing so, also supporting business and economic growth. The government largely accepted the recommendations from those recent reviews. So there's potentially a very large scale of change coming up, not just for those two regulators that we focused on in our report, but across really the whole of DEFRA's regulatory sort of framework, which, a lot of opportunity for meaningful improvement, absolutely, but also some really big risks to DEFRA and its regulators being able to really manage all that change in a coherent way.
Yeah, and why is it such a big job? What are the barriers to successful reform?
Partly it's high complexity in the system. DEFRA is responsible for 3,000 pieces of legislation. There's overlapping areas of responsibility between different regulators. Outdated IT systems place quite big constraints on what the regulators can do, so those need to be replaced. The regulators themselves have struggled with recruiting and retaining key skills and expertise that they need. And, across 3 different reviews in the past year, there were 149 recommendations made. There's changes to the water sector that will affect the Environment Agency, changes to the planning system that will affect Natural England. There's just a lot to do.
Yeah, your report highlights a culture of risk aversion. Can you just explain what you mean by that and what the implications of that culture of risk aversion are?
A common theme in our work has been that innovation needs well-managed risk-taking. There have been some good changes and innovations that we've seen from DEFRA and from the regulators, but the prevailing culture for some time has been very cautious, preferring safe and low-risk options. And this has meant not always taking opportunities to try doing things differently. You certainly saw this need for a culture shift, really, and a more embracing of change.
You mentioned cultural differences between the regulators. Why does that matter?
Particularly when it comes to areas where the regulators need to work quite closely together, need to collaborate and work jointly. There are several areas where the regulators' responsibilities kind of slightly overlap or align with each other. Farming is a very good example, in fact, because farms need to respond to both of these regulators, plus several others, the Animal and Plant Health Agency, the Rural Payments Agency. And so when there's all these different touch points with government, that sort of joining up and sharing of insight and offering these organisations a kind of a coherent experience really matters. It genuinely helps them do what they need to do and understand what's expected of them. And that's where cultural differences can create a bit of a barrier.
There isn't a single database for farms, is there? So farmers will deal with Natural England on one hand, and then they'll deal with the Environment Agency, and those two don't connect. They don't share the information, do they?
That's exactly right. And, there may be limitations on exactly how much of that could be shared between different organisations. But our view is certainly that could be taken further so that, farms and indeed other businesses are not having to provide the same or similar information to multiple regulators.
DEFRA told us in a statement that it is making what it calls sweeping changes and that it's going to bring in new strategic plans for the Environment Agency and for Natural England. But you criticise DEFRA in this report for being reactive rather than following a clear strategy, and also for being slow to act. How confident are you that it will deliver what it's promising to do there?
I mean, I would say we're cautiously hopeful. There is opportunity, there is impetus, there's kind of political backing to it. So there is genuine scope for these, what DEFRA described as sweeping reforms. There is scope for that. And I think there is a real opportunity for DEFRA to embrace that and really take a more kind of coherent strategic approach going forwards.
Rich Sullivan-Jones from the National Audit Office. And if you have any thoughts on that or anything else you've heard in the programme, do drop us an email at farming.today@bbc.co.uk. And that's all from us for this morning. I'm Kaz Graham. The producer is Sarah Swadling. And Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.